Great. Well, good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, November 22nd, 2022 at 10 a.m. This is the funding subcommittee of the House Bill 3000 Task Force. I suspect this will be the last meeting of this funding subcommittee because hopefully we can wrap up the two agenda items that we have today and wrap up our work. But first, I think we need to take a roll call. Is that correct, Amanda?
Yep, I'm happy to do that.
Or do you just record it off of what you see?
Either way works for me. I have a kind of a list here of who the invite was sent to. If you want me to go through that.
Since it's a public meeting, we might as well go through the ritual.
Okay, let's do it. Representative Morgan.
Present by video. Good morning.
Rob Bovett.
Present by video.
Tyler Bechtel.
Present by video.
Brian Martin.
I am present virtually as well.
Sheriff Sickler.
Present by video.
Kimberly McCullough.
Kimberly McCullough here, Legislative Director, Oregon Department of Justice. Thank you.
Michael Slonston. Hopefully I said your name right.
Close, yeah, I'm here.
All right. Ken?
Present by audio and now by video, or as soon as it comes up. Good morning, everyone.
Okay, and then last person I had on my list was Brent Kenyon. I think he probably needs the link, which I'll work on getting him right now.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for being here this morning. We've got a couple items on our agenda. Just by a brief recall of what we did last time, our recommendations on funding for everything but the two items that we're going to talk about today, basically charted out as $40 million as our next ask for the IMM EGP primary itself, $6 million from IMM EGP victims assistance grants, and then $5 million, essentially a carry forward, the same status level for water resources at $5 million. So that leaves the needs of the state police and the Department of Justice, which we're here to talk about today. I think we've got listed the state police on the agenda first. So let's talk about their needs. And with that, I'll turn it over to the state police and I'll let you all identify yourself. We've been working with Tyler, but I think Ryan is here as well from state police. So why don't we turn it over to state police and have them do their presentation, and then we'll see if folks have questions.
Hey, Tyler, do you want to pull up the presentation or do you want me to pull up on my side?
Yeah, why don't you fill some time here really quick and I'll bring that up.
Okay, for those of you on the subcommittee that do not know me, I'm Ryan Martin. I'm the captain for the Criminal Investigations Division for the Department of State Police. I've been in this role just a little bit over a year. My responsibilities within this role is overseeing 118 FTEs for the Criminal Investigations Division, in which we have members assigned to the Drug Enforcement Section, as well as the Major Crime Section, and then our additional unit responsibilities with explosives, arson, and digital forensics. With that, I oversee the marijuana enforcement team. We currently have personnel assigned to the marijuana enforcement team through the drug enforcement section. That includes 1 lieutenant, a sergeant in Northwest Region. We have 3 detectives assigned to Northwest Region, 1 sergeant out of Southwest Region, and 5 detectives assigned to Southwest Region. And we recently added administrative support staff in Southwest Region as well. For those that, go ahead, Tyler.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm traveling, and so if you'll bear with me, people, I'm working with 1 monitor, if you can believe people do that anymore. Am I showing the PowerPoint right now?
Yes.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and advance the slide because I think that you're into the presentation now.
So as far as the team overview, our goals include stopping the diversion of marijuana from the regulated market, preventing revenue from the sale of marijuana from going to criminal enterprises, disrupting the diversion of marijuana from this state to other states, preventing marijuana activity that is legal under state law from being used as a cover for and/or pretext for trafficking, of other illegal drugs or illegal activity, and preventing violence and the use of firearms in association with the cultivation and distribution of marijuana. These goals, as you're aware, were derived from the text of Measure 91. However, we place our primary focus on those of greater priority, and those are cases that involve guns, labor trafficking, labor exploitation, cannabis extraction, and organized crime, of which those receive greater priority. In 2021, we did have Operation New Green Dynasty, which was a large case that ended up, we conducted 25 search warrants at various locations and seized assets, as well as marijuana with a criminal organization that was operating up in our Northwest region area. So as I already discussed, these are the current FTE positions that we have assigned to the marijuana enforcement team that you see before you. And in order for our team to meet its mission, we respond to tips and complaints regarding the regulation of marijuana, illegal exploitation or exportation, diversion, and trafficking of marijuana. And we also follow up on cases from agency troopers through our domestic highway enforcement. We do quite a bit of interdiction, both in Lake County and Jackson County. We've had some good seizures up in the Lane County area as well. And with that, there's follow through that's conducted by our highway interdiction team detectives that are also assigned under the drug enforcement section. We do initiate some cases based off of informants and surveillance, and we assist local, state, and federal task force teams, including the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission illegal marijuana market enforcement grant program teams, which has grown through the grants that you have provided. We conduct training regarding marijuana enforcement and laws. This is done through various organizations throughout the state. And our team responds daily to assist outside agency teams, including data sharing, search warrant preparation, documentation, search warrant execution, evidence collection, enforcement, and surveillance. With that being the case, these are the cases that we work specifically with our marijuana enforcement team, where we have been the lead investigator. You will see cases both in 2021 as well as 2022. You'll see some numbers on our co-case counts, as well as the assists that we provide to grant teams and others.
Captain, if I could interject there, because we're going to get into some 2022 stats, and I just wanted to clarify. You can see on this particular distribution of our cases by role that it's pretty consistent. It is important to note, though, that 2022 stats are year to date, and there's a bit of a lag time when we finish cases. You know, our busy season gets done in October, so there's a bit of a lag time. The last thing after the case is culminated, it goes into our database. So some of those cases are ongoing and not reflected here, and we'll see that kind of throughout the statistics we share with you today.
So on this slide, you'll see the number of cases that we assigned in 2021 based on the number of tips that we received. And as you can see from the pie chart, 269 cases were not assigned because we don't have adequate resources to be able to deal with the tips that are coming in. So 269 of those were not assigned because we did not have a detective available. The remaining the 275, there was either unfounded or there was not enough information for us to follow up on. From 2021 to 2022, the marijuana enforcement team averages over 300 unworked tips or cases not assigned. And when the tips are in grant team counties, we will often refer it to those grant team counties if we don't have the resources to follow up on those. So for our enforcement totals, as far as marijuana that was seized, you'll see some numbers here in relation to 2021 as well as 2022 year to date. And this is the numbers of marijuana that we have seized for indoor plants, outdoor plants, and then bulk marijuana. And those are based on poundage, so total pounds.
Really quick here too, there is quite a disparity between 21 and 22. And there were a couple of remarkable cases in 21 that would account for the difference, as well as the fact that 2022, we're only looking at year-to-date statistics, and I expect a small rise in those 2022 numbers. For instance, the indoor plants in 2021, we did have that Operation New Green Dynasty, which was 25 locations that resulted in a lot of indoor plants. And then over in the bulk marijuana column, we did have a single seizure of an estimated 500,000 pounds down in Southern Oregon.
So then in this slide, you'll see firearms seized and arrests that have been made by our marijuana enforcement team, and you'll see an increase from 2021 to 2022 year to date. We've gone from 115 firearms seized in 2021 to 157 this year to date, and our arrests have almost doubled from 38 arrests in 2021 to 70 in 2022. This slide shows you the search warrant executions in 2021. This is going to be in relation to the grant team assists and total warrants that have been served. And so in 2021, approximately 33% of our warrant services, it was our team assisting the grant teams or co-cases. And these warrants include physical locations, vehicles, bank accounts, phones, etc. When you look at our 2022 numbers year to date, approximately 41% of the warrant services were grant team assists or co-cases. Again, warrants on the same types of locations and or property. I think you can also drive a correlation with the grant teams. Initially, I believe there was 4 of them, and now we're looking at 10 grant teams. So it's very likely that our increase in our assists are going to be due to the creation of the new grant teams. As far as partnering with the grant teams, our goal is to effectively achieve our partnerships with these grant teams, and they're crucial because we share the same goal. We are all operating under limited staffing, both investigative and operational. There's commonly a case overlap, you know, like when we talk about our new Green Dynasty case with 25 separate locations under warrants that were served. There's going to be overlap, multi-jurisdiction type cases where we've got grows under the same organization, but they're occurring in multiple counties. And then with this, obviously, we need to have constant communication for deconfliction because the county grant teams may be working a case that ties into a multi-jurisdictional case that we're already working on. And so we just need to make sure that we have these established partnerships so the information sharing is broad and statewide. Mostly these teams rely on OSP when a case reaches outside their jurisdiction. So when it becomes a multi-jurisdictional case, they'll commonly reach out to us and we'll assist and move the case forward. In many circumstances, some of the grant teams, because of their limited resources, they tend to be a little bit smaller. And so when they need warrant service support, they reach out to OSP because as a statewide organization, we have the ability to shift resources from other places in the state. This commonly involves our OSP SWAT team, when it's a higher risk warrant service, or our mobile response team when there's needs for additional labor. We had a case more recently here in Yamhill County where we brought in our mobile response team because it was a large eradication effort. And when it comes to eradicating that quantity of marijuana, you need multiple boots on the ground to be able to assist with those efforts. Plus, we also have a clan lab team. And so when you end up with a warrant that's served on a BHO type facility where there's extraction taking place, our personnel will come out and assist with the clan lab portion, ensuring that the scene is safe for dismantling, etc. We have 3 planes in the air through our Fish and Wildlife Division, and they are commonly tasked with doing flyovers as well for drug warrants for pre-intel purposes and surveillance. So our aircraft have the ability to assist in those circumstances as well. And then we also have equipment like excavators and skid steers and trailers so we can assist with the eradication and dismantling efforts. So originally, as most of you are aware, or maybe some of you aren't, we were created in 1931 with the main goal of assisting local police agencies and sheriff's departments. Today, we continue to provide the support to our local agency partners. We've seen a rise in requests for service from these specialized teams. In addition to the growth of the grant teams, we continue to get additional requests for assists, as we previously showed you in our pie charts. With the increased grant funding, there ends up being an unfunded workload placed on OSP in general. And I want to explain to you that these costs are both direct and indirect. It's direct in relation to the fact that when these grant teams request assistance from our marijuana enforcement team, we have the direct costs associated with the marijuana enforcement team and their efforts. But when we're tapping our SWAT team or MRT team or additional personnel to respond to assist these grant teams, we take on the labor costs that are associated with that, as well as the personnel and the equipment time. The indirect costs that I want to talk to you about is when you look at some of the underfunded counties that we have in the state, Klamath County, Josephine County, The indirect costs correlate to, like in Josephine County, they've created a grant team for marijuana enforcement. They have personnel that are dedicated to the investigation of the illicit marijuana problems in Josephine County. But our major crime section detectives out of Central Point handle all of their Measure 11 investigations, their homicides, their violent assaults, officer-involved shootings. They take on all of the DHS referrals that we get for child abuse and neglect. And they have no detectives in Josephine County dedicated to that task. So that falls on OSP as well. And so there's the indirect cost of these grant teams on OSP in addition to the direct costs. When you're estimating support for illegal marijuana market enforcement grant, if you take a look at our number of deployments here, the DES detective deployments in support of the grant teams average about 6 OSP detectives. For SWAT, if there's a SWAT deployment, approximately 30 troopers will be responding to assist with a high risk warrant service. As far as MRT, we would average 6 troopers that would be deployed. And then obviously if it's a Klan lab or a BHO related incident, approximately 5 troopers respond to that. On an average SWAT deployment, we incur approximately 4 hours of overtime for each individual. And so with our conclusion, we can expect to see an increase in labor costs as the grant teams continue to get established and increase their number of cases based on the increased Criminal Justice Commission funding. In our opinion, we would be asking the task force to support increased funding for OSP marijuana enforcement in your final report to the legislature. We see this as being a couple of options. We're not asking for FTEs. I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm sure most of our law enforcement agencies in the state can attest to the same. We have a recruitment and a retention problem. It's hard for us to be able to hire adequate people to get out in patrol as well as other areas of the agency. We currently have 9 vacancies in our drug enforcement section that I can't fill. Half of those come out of the Portland area, and our Portland staffing for our patrol division is not good. So until I can get patrol officers on the street, I can't backfill CID positions. So we're not asking for FTEs because I can't realistically fill those in the short term. One option that we're asking for is either to allow OSP to apply for the grant funds. So one of the questions is, can we apply for the current funding cycle? The secondary option to that is that we would recommend, or we would ask that you recommend to the legislature that funds added to the total OSP budget to continue supporting outside agencies on our investigations. And with that, we came up with an approximate estimate of what those costs would be. We took the average for overtime for our marijuana detectives on an annual basis. And so we're estimating $350,000 for detective overtime, $100,000 for training costs, $100,000 for contractors, and these would include interpreters, financial investigations, and equipment rental. And then we would need $115,000 for current costs related to marijuana through marijuana testing machines, cell phone forensics, electronic surveillance, power tools, specialized uniforms, etc. And then we have an anticipated overtime cost of approximately $69,000. So our annual cost or request would be approximately $734,000. And now I'm willing to entertain any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you, Captain, for that presentation. Any questions or comments from members of the subcommittee? I have a couple, but let's see if others have as well. Representative Morgan, go ahead.
I just was going to ask, Captain, are you able to stay through our meeting? Or
Yes.
were you just staying for the presentation?
I can stay through the meeting.
I appreciate that. That'll give me time to introduce what I was thinking and get some feedback on later, Rob, if that's okay.
That sounds great. Any other comments or questions? I guess I do have a question. Well, in relation to the IMM-EGP, my thoughts are it doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense to me to add OSP to the IMM-EGP since that's the mechanism we created to get state dollars to flow to local agencies to address this issue, whereas the legislature can directly allocate money to the state police, and they can't really do that for sheriffs or chiefs. But I'm not averse to adding them, but my guess is you wouldn't qualify now because the way we've crafted the statute. I think it really does. It's grants to counties and victims assistance providers, but maybe Ken might have more information on that. But as I'm seeing it, it looks like we've got basically the biennial ask would be $1.5 million, and either way we go. So Ken, I saw your hand pop up. Director Sanchagrin from CJC, what are your thoughts about the various options of how to handle this?
I was just going to confirm that just from a statutory and rules perspective, we would have to change both of those because I think it's defined explicitly as units of local government, which so we could include cities and counties, but not state government. And I think that I guess what I was going to say is kind of agreeing with you, Rob. I don't have any heartburn if we needed to run it through CJC, but certainly I think if we could get the money allocated directly, that probably would be cleaner. But we'd be pretty open and we could be flexible. We just have to change those parts.
Agreed. All right, Representative Morgan, comments?
Well, I don't necessarily want OSP to compete for the grant dollars. I would like to see dedicated funding for them that is also protected. If it's kind of like a yes and a yes, like the local governments towards the grant that they can't get the funding otherwise, but we do need to have dedicated funding for the state police portion of this as well. So if there's a way to do that, that's not in the grant, but is protected funding for the purpose, that's what I'm looking for.
Great. I mean, one possibility would be to do a direct allocation, just like we do for, say, Water Resources Department. They get the $5 million directly. It doesn't come through CJC. I think Tyler was up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Rep. Morgan for her comment. When I look at the history of marijuana funding to OSP, we consistently see it put in one end and taken out the other. And that would be my only concern with going outside the CJC process. While it would need a legislative fix to allow us to receive those funds, I don't think it is a competitive grant process now, and I don't think that's the right place for us. But personally, I'm uneasy about the history of marijuana funding being allocated and then removed from the overall budget at the end of the day. And so really what we're talking about here is, the overall criminal investigation division budget is funded part with marijuana funds. And if we're not careful, we can end up in the exact same situation we're in now after a legislative recommendation.
And I couldn't agree more, Tyler. I mean, we just have to look at the IMM EGP. We just have to look at Measure 91 for the ongoing example where Measure 91 allocated 15% of net cannabis proceeds to the state police. And in fact, that money did flow to the state police, but the same amount of money flowed out the back door. So it's a valid point. I don't know, Ken, do you have any ideas about how to get around maybe that sticky wicket? We could make both recommendations, or what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I think we could make both recommendations, but as I've mentioned in this group before, I think that looking at the statutory provision about funding and trying to clean that up would be a good idea anyway. Because we've already mentioned before that right now, the way that the statute is written, the counties will be competing also with CBOs and the victim service money. Now that's all kind of rolled together in one, just based on the language we have. And so my recommendation there would be to create some specific funding streams, a bucket for the counties and local governments, a bucket for CBOs and victim services. But then if we're already creating buckets, maybe we could create a separate bucket for OSP or for maybe state level enforcement of some type. The one thing that I worry about making just a state allocation is I also don't then want a bunch of other agencies, because now they're eligible, coming to us to try to eat away at that money that we're trying to at the moment earmark for OSP. But I might also worry that if we just earmark it only for OSP, perhaps then LFO would not like that. I'm not sure, but I think separate buckets would be the best way to go. overall. And then that also speeds up our process. I think, as we saw last time, being able to move quickly is really, really beneficial. But that might be a way to kind of have our cake and eat it too, if we can get the language down.
And maybe I'll work on that, because I really like that idea, Ken, because we'd already talked about needing to clean up that language anyways, because all these IMM EGP programs kind of got stacked on each other without a whole lot of thought as we expanded into this new environment. And plus, in probably a few minutes, we're going to hear from the Department of Justice, and we may need a creative way to fund what they need too, or maybe not. I guess we'll hear. But Tyler, you have further thoughts?
Yeah, just really quick for context for the committee. Right now, the marijuana tax revenue coming to the state police is 6.75 million a year, I believe. It's since it's measure 110 cap or about 13.5 million per biennium. Just for context, with that, with the ask that we're presenting with you today, that's kind of commiserate with what Sheriff Sickler gets. It's close. And that would assume that, of course, we use that 6.75 million for marijuana enforcement now, which unfortunately we don't. We fund a lot of other programs with it just because of the position we're in. So, when it comes to tying this request to CJC money, just food for thought here. I would hope that the committee would look at this as an extension of the CJC teams. I know Sheriff Sickler's guys know that they can call us up in Portland. I know that the Lane County team does it often. These are we're all looking for organizations, right? We're looking for organized crime. And when you're trying to get your money out of an illicit field, you take it to a metropolitan center. That's the best way to get rid of it, or get it legalized or washed. And so we have a lot of tie to cases all around the state. And then also, we are an extension of the CJC teams in that we're where they're not, right? So we are going to go to the smaller counties that haven't got on board with the team yet, that won't be getting on board. So I just wanted to put those thoughts out there.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Sheriff Sickler.
Yeah, I just wanted to just add in a little bit. I'm kind of in favor of seeing if there's a way to get OSP into the grant process, just because with leadership changes, whether that's at the superintendent position, the governor's position, I think if the funding is dedicated towards this issue, then it's earmarked for that, and we can consistently count on those partnerships. If the money is in a more of a general fund, the teams could be reallocated, and there would not be necessarily anything to be done about that. And we do rely on OSP as a partner in a lot of areas, but specifically the marijuana that we're talking about today, they've been a great partner for us here in Southern Oregon, and I'd like to be able to count on that in the future.
It's making much more sense to me, that proposal, and to create the buckets that Ken described. So maybe, assuming if the committee gets there at the end of hearing the next presentation, maybe we can authorize Ken and I to work up a little draft piece of legislation to clean those buckets up, along with our recommended funding levels. But anyone else have any comments or questions about the OSP proposal, which appears to be, as I mentioned, about 1.5 million for the biennium? Looks like Brent's got something. Go ahead, Brent.
Hi, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I was just curious if, and it's sounding like there's not, but is there no way to have a legislative, funding proposal that would be specific to what it was used for? And that would be from the general fund, I'm guessing, correct? 2 questions.
Yeah, and maybe I'll defer a piece of that to Ken as well. We've stayed away so far from making a recommendation about where the legislature gets the specific money from, even though at least my temptation is to strongly urge them to take it off the top of cannabis taxes, but that's a political thing, as you know. because Measure 110 took the bulk of those taxes to fund, other important things, of course. But so I'm not sure what to really do with that. I don't know. Ken, do you have any thoughts about Brent's question? I'm really not sure how to navigate that piece.
I mean, not necessarily anything more than you mentioned. I mean, that we made that direct request in short session. And I mean, for lack of a better description, we ran into a brick wall. I was happy that we got the funding that we did, but I think that we agree logically that's where it could or should come from. But politically, that did not seem feasible at the time.
Okay, and then the other part was, can it be done legislatively to be very specific where the money is spent, or it has to go through the grant process to have that specific language?
On that issue, I mean, that's what I was thinking initially. We would ask the legislature to do a direct allocation for the specific issues, because they don't have to go through CJC. But again, this gets back to the issue that Tyler pointed out and the sheriff pointed out, which I have to agree with, which is the legislature has a long-standing past pattern and practice of giving the state police new money and taking that exact same amount out the back door. So if we do a direct allocation to the state police, or even to the state for the specific service, my fear is that somebody's just going to lose that same amount of money out the back door based on a long past pattern and practice. So I get that concern, and I'm not sure how to navigate that, to be honest.
So what would the timeline look like, Rob, on getting it added to the grant process? Is that something that can be done fairly quickly? I mean, I understand you got to look at that, but.
Yeah, so what we would theoretically do would craft up a bill, just a one-section bill to get into the IMM-EGP statute that's been used and abused for many years now, and try to clean it all up. And in terms of the buckets that Ken described, because we have these buckets now pretty well defined, and I don't think it would be a substantive bill at all. So the only question would be, how quickly could it get through the process? I don't, realistically, it's a May or June thing.
Well, I definitely am supportive of that. I think whatever is going to secure that money for what we're talking about here is the most important path forward as far as my vote goes on it. I think if that's where it makes sense, we want to make sure these guys have what they need.
Sheriff Sickler, do you have something more? Nope. Anybody else have anything more for state police before we hear from Department of Justice and their needs? All right, not seeing any more hands. I'll turn it over to Kimberly and Michael. I'm not sure who's on deck.
Thank you, Rob. This is Kimberly McCullough. I'm Legislative Director for Oregon Department of Justice, and I will kick us off and then pass it over to Michael to give you a little bit more information. I don't have a fancy slideshow, so hopefully that's all right for y'all. It was a little bit more informal. So I am super grateful, and thank you, Rob, for setting this up so that we could come talk to folks. Really glad to be here to chat with you. I'll sort of kick it off by telling you what our proposal is, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some context, and then pass it to Michael to give you a little bit of context about how our criminal division might be able to help here. But what we're hoping you will consider is adding funding for a resource prosecutor and investigator at the Department of Justice to help assist local law enforcement on the labor trafficking side of what is happening on the ground in connection with illegal cannabis operations. So just a quick overview of DOJ and sort of what we do in the labor trafficking and human trafficking area. We really have been building out a response to human trafficking in earnest since 2015, but it is very much a work in progress. In 2015, we hired a human trafficking intervention coordinator, and at that time, there were only a few counties that were addressing human trafficking issues in the state. This was really finally the first time that we had a program that focused on the whole state with the goal of helping to support local folks. So we have sought and received funding from the feds a number of times, 2018, 2019, and actually just this year, we received more funding from the feds to help us expand our team. I will say that historically, our work has focused primarily on sex trafficking, And a big portion of the funding that we've received has really been focused on providing support for victims, also for helping local communities build out local task forces to connect service providers, law enforcement, and other stakeholders to help address things on the ground. We currently have 11 local task forces in 15 counties. We would really like to expand those and are eager to continue to expand them. But like I said, mostly it has been focused on sex trafficking historically. In the last couple of years, we've really worked to expand our focus to labor trafficking. And we did just receive some funding from the Office of Victims of Crime in the federal government to build out our labor trafficking victim response side. So we will be hiring a labor trafficking specialist. Their focus will be on victim support, expanding those task forces, as I said, labor trafficking training, and then public education and awareness. But what's really missing in the funding that we've received from the federal government, and what's really missing, I think, in our system is on the ground assistance from DOJ for local law enforcement, investigation, and prosecution. I did want to also just mention we have a labor trafficking task force. Representative Morgan has been very, very active in that group, and we've really appreciated her being there and a number of other stakeholders. We are going to be bringing legislation this next session related to labor trafficking. We have a bunch of improvements to our criminal laws that we'll be making happen to really expand our existing involuntary servitude and labor trafficking crimes to make sure that those are actually tools that can be used by law enforcement. That unfortunately the laws are just written far too narrowly as it is right now. We're going to be expanding protections for victims who participate in criminal prosecutions, expanding civil actions that are available to victims so that they can seek redress through the civil legal process on their own, increasing our labor trafficking awareness efforts, expanding our training for state agencies. We already do provide training at DPSST. That has, again, historically focused on sex trafficking, but we have now expanded it to labor trafficking. But we really want training for all of the state agencies that have potential contact with victims. And so all of that is going to be packaged into a labor trafficking task force bill. We are not expecting a fiscal on that bill. There are so many really important policy changes that we want to get into the law that we're hoping to avoid a fight in Ways and Means and just get it across both floors. Knowing that this House Bill 3000 group is also looking at labor trafficking, and you know, I had a conversation with Rob about this, and we're sort of thinking, how are ways that our two groups can actually be supporting each other? And knowing that you all were looking at some resource asks, it seemed like there was a great opportunity here to work together to address the real need for local law enforcement and DAs to have support. And that certainly has been something that our labor trafficking task force has identified as a need. So we priced out what it would cost to hire a resource prosecutor and investigator at DOJ. We're looking at a total of $750,000. That would cover 2 positions, their salaries, benefits, supplies, and services. So $750,000 would be the price tag. And to help you understand a little bit more about what we're talking about as far as a resource prosecutor and investigator, I'm going to pass it over to Michael Slauson. This is a model that we have at DOJ that we've used in a variety of different contexts, and I think has been very successful. So I just want Michael to share with you a little bit like what it is that we do, how it works, and what we could offer to local communities.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Slauson. I'm the Chief Counsel of the Criminal Justice Division. The Criminal Justice Division is responsible for performing the law enforcement and prosecutorial functions of the Department of Justice. And we're not, at least our division is not quite as old as OSP. It started in 1969 with the District Attorney Assistance Program. And what's unique about our program is that we have both prosecutors and sworn law enforcement working in the same operation to support DAs and law enforcement across the state. So in 69, we started the DA Assist program. Our core functionality there is to provide advice and training assistance to DAs, trial support, and investigative support when necessary. In 1977, a little historical perspective, the Oregon legislature created the Organized Crime Program, which included duties such as investigating financial crimes, working with law enforcement to suppress organized crime within the state, and actually in some public corruption cases as well. And then in the late 80s, we developed an analytical support program. So we have crime analysts in the division that I think are extremely important when you're talking about investigation of complex crimes. Around 2004-ish, I think 2004 or 2003, we started with our first resource prosecutor, a DUII resource prosecutor, Dina Ryerson, which I know a number of you know Dina pretty well. And what her core functionality is to come in and deal with cases that are handled typically by newer prosecutors, but are kind of complex. They deal with a lot of complex issues in terms of evidence and search and seizure. And so her duties primarily are to go out and provide training and advice to the district attorneys. And you also know, those of you who know her in this meeting, she does some policy work as well. It's been extremely successful. She's very well known throughout the state, and she has great impact on the local level. Building on that success, the department added a domestic violence resource prosecutor who also does the training and advice, not so much on the trials, and also has a pretty heavy footprint in policy for the DV resource prosecutor, which is very consistent with the overall approach that we have in our division, which is to not supplant local resources, but enhance their efforts in particularly complex areas where they don't have sometimes it's the expertise and sometimes it's the personnel. And from then we've just kept building. So we're up to 6 right now categories and resource prosecutors. We have wildlife, environmental crimes and cultural resources, bias crimes. And then the one I think is probably most analogous to what we're talking about here is an elder abuse resource team. And so what was unique to the other resource programs, and since we added investigators, and it was identifying a need in elder abuse, which is something that required a lot of technical expertise. So at the local level, you get a case and local agencies who are not familiar with it, they don't see it very often, think, well, this sounds like, oh, you have a power of attorney. It sounds like maybe it's a civil issue. And really what our role there is to come in and help them, not take all their cases, but help and educate them so that they're better at identifying the appropriate cases for a criminal investigation or prosecution, and help them work them through the process. So sometimes that might be just giving advice over the phone. It can be provided training. It can be helping them with motion practice. Sometimes, like I said, it is taking the case on in its entirety. So that in that case, what we have is we have a resource prosecutor, and then we have 2 special agents who are sworn law enforcement officers, one who's an expert in financial crimes and one is an expert in abuse crimes, so that we can provide that expertise to the local agencies in terms of what does, if you have bed sores, like what's, what kind of prosecution standards, investigative standards do you have for those types of cases? Also, the elder abuse team puts together an elder abuse conference every year, the Attorney General's Elder Abuse Conference. Some of you may have attended that conference, but it's really about taking kind of a multidisciplinary approach to these issues, leveraging partnerships, with the Adult Protective Services, other organizations, nonprofits, to try to really have a cohesive approach to addressing elder abuse issues in the state. And so what you see kind of across the board with our resource prosecutors or investigators are really a mere reflection of what we do at the department, which is, again, trying to help out local agencies where we can be most impactful. And the one thing with the resource prosecutors is that, and the investigators, is they can leverage the other resources of the department. So I think some of you know on this call that we provide a lot of support for local law enforcement and complex investigations that might require electronic surveillance, financial crime investigations. We have 2 financial crime investigators. And also, as I mentioned previously, the analytical support is extremely critical in these types of cases. I would say the one caveat when I think about a labor trafficking resource prosecutor and an investigator is that, and I've talked with our own LFO analysts about this when it comes to environmental crimes, is that these things do take time. And so what I would anticipate is helping, initially building expertise and helping the local law enforcement identify and help support those investigations and prosecutions, and helping to be, and us coming in and helping in the more complex cases that may require those additional resources, additional time and attention, but it will take time. So whether you could, it's going to take a program that would have to build up over time as we build the expertise. You got to think long game.
Great. Thank you, both Kimberly and Michael. Interestingly enough, I think you're at roughly the same dollar amount as state police for a biennium at 1.5. So that's easy. My big question, and then I'll get to other folks' question, is does DOJ, and I honestly don't know the answer to this, does DOJ have the same history with the legislature of getting money and then taken out the back door? So would it be in other words, would it be better if this particular ask flowed through the CJC through its own dedicated bucket to DOJ, or just a direct allocation to DOJ?
So being at DOJ for a little over 2 years now, I feel like this is something I might want to, ask our deputy AG about. My initial thought is that it probably would make more sense for it to be a direct allocation. And then that's something that we could then come and fight to keep our current service level up, in future sessions, so that this group would help get it kicked off, but then we could add that into our regular advocacy. I don't know, Michael, if that makes most sense to you, since you've been around a lot longer than I have.
Yeah, Rob, I haven't experienced that. I mean, we're a division within the department, and we're, for those of you that don't know, the way that it works is that each division within the Department of Justice has its own budget, and it's isolated from the rest of the division. So I have not experienced that in my tenure here.
That's good news, because to me it makes more sense.
I say that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes more sense to treat state police that way as well, but there's that sordid history that Tyler mentioned that we all lived. So if you haven't experienced that problem, let's not poke at it. Let's maybe just do a direct allocation, as you suggest, into the division. Does anybody have any questions or comments about DOJ's presentation about their needs for two resource prosecutors to address labor trafficking? Probably getting too close to Thanksgiving. Not too many questions. Well, I mean, if somebody wants to make a motion to approve both of these $1.5 million requests, and then we can maybe have a second motion to deal with the state police and authorizing Ken and I to do what we need to do with the buckets. Representative Morgan, go ahead.
Well, and I have a legislative concept that I was working on, actually a couple of them already, and it could be potentially that I give you a base to kind of start from, where I had just established a 50 million threshold for the grants, and kind of establishing, and if we need to edit, in that I had allocated 5 million per biennium for state police. So sorry, I was asking for so much. I had not thought about the DOJ concept of prosecution, but I think that is important. It's kind of a conversation that last year was a concern for, does BOLI have enough support to help with the financial side and the employer side of things? Is there a mechanism for prosecuting? And I think because it's statewide, it makes sense that it's DOJ to step up in that capacity. The CBOs need their dedicated funds that do not compete with the law enforcement. And I've had people say, why would you ask for more funding if the problem's decreasing or it's doing this and that? And it's not. As long as there's a single person that is trafficked and forced into work without pay, without proper things, we need to hit this hard until it's done. And it'd be great if we worked our way out of a job in this area, but we're not there yet. And we're seeing weekly responses still needed. So anyhow, I had asked for CJC to get 50 million, of which 5 million would be dedicated to state police. So I'm willing to offer that to you guys too, since it's already kind of started, unless you want to start from scratch, Rob. But I mean, it's one of those things that if we don't have a mechanism, I am willing to help any way I can to keep going that direction.
Yeah, and I don't think we're to the mechanism yet. I mean, that's great. You have an LC in there. I think what this is really about is what we're baking into our report in terms of a financial ask. So I mean, we could certainly ask for 5, but we've heard a justification for 1.5 for state police and a justification for 1.5 for DOJ to make part of our report for the next biennium. So that's kind of what I'm looking at tackling at the moment right now. And then I was going to talk about the mechanism next.
I appreciate those 2 spots, but do we need to protect the others? Because we've never gotten to the level that all the grant applicants from the local law enforcements have had their needs met. Matter of fact, we've heard the restrictions of that because it's only a year at a time, it's only a this and that at a time. I see Kimberly 750,000. That's awesome. Is that an annual or a biennium?
I believe that's the biennium.
Okay. But I think we also, I mean, it's great. Let's have the motion for the 2, but I also want to address the fact that our local law enforcement has never been to that level. We do, I mean, maybe it is authorizing you and Ken to fix the language, that the CBOs have their dedication, that the DOJ and the state police have their dedication, and the water master, those pieces that we've built up to. I just don't want to leave any of it out. So I'll be quiet now.
No, that's great. I'm not sure. So our current standing recommendation, at least as a task force, is 40 million for the law enforcement side of IMM-EGP, 6 million for the victims side of IMM-EGP, 5 million for OWRD. I'm hearing potentially a $1.5 million recommendation for OSP, and potentially a 750 or whatever that number is that Kimberly put on the screen for DOJ resource prosecutors for this next biennium. If we want to bump those up, that's fine, but I'm just dealing with the numbers that have been put in front of us today. So I guess, looks like Tyler's got a question or a comment.
Yeah, Rob, if I could, I want to clarify that our ask today is above and beyond, and this is specifically in support to the marijuana grant program. This isn't paying for our 11 full-time positions. And so while I like Rep. Morgan's $5 million figure, thank you for thinking of us, Rep. Morgan. I want to be clear that this is just extra, that we're basically pulling, robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're taking this money out of the Criminal Investigation Division budget when we're responding, or we're taking it out of the patrol budget when we're moving MRT and SWAT teams to help marijuana grant teams. So I just wanted to be very clear that this is above and beyond what we already get. We're not necessarily saying that this is all it takes for marijuana enforcement. I'm sure Sheriff Sickler could put to work 10 or 15 detectives. Captain Martin and I have envisioned a world where we have 20 detectives. We know that's not in the cards, but I just want to make sure and point out that this is specifically our costs to support the best we could estimate marijuana grant teams.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Looks like Captain Martin has a comment as well.
Yeah, and I would just say on top of that, like if $5 million were to be infused into our CID budget without money going out the back door, then I could fund those 11 FTEs with the money that came in, and I could potentially add positions back to DES that were taken away and shifted over to marijuana enforcement that were dedicated to our HIDA initiative teams throughout the state. We have 13 HIDA initiative teams. We used to have a footprint in 10 of those. We're currently down to 5, and with a transfer back to patrol in January, we're going to drop to 4 HIDA initiative teams that we have representation on. And that's having a tremendous impact on our KPMs, our key performance measures that we report to.
And I think it's also having a tremendous impact on the topic of the day, which is overdose deaths related to fentanyl and methamphetamine. We're not there to support those local HIDA teams. And with that, I'm going to have to bow out and leave you in the hands of Captain Martin. I've got a flight to catch, but I appreciate everyone's time today.
Safe travels, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler. Representative Morgan.
Okay, I'm going to attempt a motion. I am going to make a motion that we do recommend the requested allocations of the 751 million per biennium for DOJ, the 5 million for state police to restore what was already taken so that they can keep their other programs whole that are just as important, and authorize Ken and Rob to come back with the the wording to update that we're keeping all the other funding mechanisms whole as well. Should I not have broken it down on all in one?
Well, no, that's fine. I'm just I'm needing more input from Captain Ryan, I think, because you're proposing a $5 million allocation to state police. They've asked for a $1.5 million allocation through CJC so we can avoid the backdoor. So is the 5 million going to flow through CJC to avoid the backdoor? I just don't know what the 5 million.
I want 5 million per biennium dedicated for marijuana enforcement to be protected from backdoor. If it needs to go through CJC, I'm okay with that. What I heard Captain Martin say after I said that I was asking for 5 million is they would be able to restore things they had to steal from to do the marijuana. It'd be great if they didn't have to do that. So instead of the 1.5 to keep status quo, doing the 5 million to make both whole, where we're funding marijuana as it should be, that leaves their other funds to go back to where they were supposed to be. That's my intent.
So would that, I guess my question of Captain Martin, would that be the right amount? We've heard 1.5 for non-personnel needs, additional needs, ads, as Tyler mentioned. We've heard you also reference the $5 million backfill. I just need to understand the difference between those two. Is the 1.5 included in the 5, and then it's just 3.5 for personnel? I mean, what is that composed of?
Okay, so I will tell you, just for an average trooper, I believe our overall personnel cost for salary benefits is $250,000 per biennium. And so this is not including sergeant salary or our lieutenant salary, which I would have to get those numbers for you. But if you took that and you multiplied that by the 11 positions that we currently have, that puts us at 2.75 million. And so then if you added the 1.5 million on top of that, that gets us to 4.25. With that, I think there would be the additional costs that are associated with the vehicles, the equipment, the increase in salary for the sergeants that are supervising the detectives, as well as the lieutenant that's working there. So roughly, we would probably be right at the 5 million that you're suggesting. With that, if that was dedicated to our marijuana enforcement team, then I would be able to release the vacancies that we have in DES elsewhere to fill as we continue to fill those with recruitment and retention. And I can place detectives back on the HIDA initiative teams so we can get back to dismantling and disrupting DTOs collectively, to include the issues that we're experiencing with fentanyl. I don't know if you've seen it, but our seizures are through the roof on our fentanyl seizures coming in and through Oregon. And that's quite alarming. I will tell you, as of more recently, we've had some pretty large cocaine seizures as well. And within this past year, cocaine has been down. And so now I'm starting to be alarmed by the amount of cocaine that we're seeing coming into our state, in addition to the fentanyl seizures that we're getting. So I think 5 million, I would be able to dedicate that to marijuana enforcement. I will tell you, in the short session, Senator Brzezinski had reached out asking what the legislature could do if they were to be able to provide us some additional funds, and we looked at adding potentially a sergeant and potentially 5 additional detectives and what the cost would be associated with that. But again, when we're dealing with an issue where we don't have dedicated funding specific to marijuana, it comes out of our general fund, and then we've got to shift. In this circumstance, we had to shift guys from other DES roles and assignments into marijuana enforcement because of the problems that we're seeing.
Okay, I don't mean to belabor that. I hear all that. I actually agree with all of it. My question really is, would you want the entire 5 million then to flow through the CJC through a dedicated individual bucket grant structure? It would be separated from the others in order to avoid the backdoor thing that we
Yes,
talked about.
I would completely support that. I will tell you, my understanding is recently CFO, LFO had reached out asking about our forfeiture account. And I had to express that that's IFCOM, it's not necessarily income, and we can't use that to supplant our detective positions. So, you know, there's always going to be that ebb and flow game of ensuring adequate funding, and I know the state has other needs that they need to accomplish as well with that funding.
Great. Okay, now I think I understand. Maybe I could, if you'd allow, Representative Morgan, I could rephrase your motion and see if it makes sense to everybody. Maybe we get a second and move forward. So what I think is the motion is that in addition to what we previously recommended, we would recommend a $5 million allocation to the state police through the CJC IMM EGP, the grant program, as its separate bucket, and authorize Ken and I to clean up that language, and also fund the ask that Kimberly has in our chat, just a little over $750,000 for the resource prosecutors. Is that a fair characterization of your motion, Representative Morgan?
Yes, I think I had misquoted 750 million. Yeah, 751,000.
Hey, if you can find 750 million, that's great. All right.
It's growing in around my county, and no, I'm just kidding.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Sheriff Sickler seconds the motion. Is there any further discussion or questions or conversation? Looks like Amanda from OLCC has a question or comment.
Yep, I just wanted to let you know that in the draft report, which we're hoping to have out by tomorrow, so everybody has time to review it prior to our Monday meeting, we still have the dollar amount set as a blank so that we can fill in the full ask at the Monday meeting. So
and that's
fine. Everybody is aware of that.
And that's fine. And my goal will be to work with Ken if we can to try to get at least a draft concept so you can see the language changes as well. But all right. Any other comments, questions? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Not seeing any. You want to take the roll, Amanda, and maybe we can wrap up this meeting.
Yep, as a vote on the
motion and second to authorize recommending 5 million additional for OSP with a restructured CJC IMM EGP language that Ken and I will work up, plus the 750,000 and change for DOJ.
Okay, Representative Morgan.
Yes.
Rob Bavette.
Yes.
Captain Martin.
Yes.
Sheriff Sickler.
Yes.
And I don't want to ruin your last name.
Yes.
Okay. Brent Kenyon.
Yes.
All right. Kimberly.
I don't think I get to vote, but I'll say yes anyway.
All right. So, and that was who I had on the list initially for the agenda.
Subcommittee. That's great. Okay, well, that motion passes. We'll make that recommendation. I think we have you're right, we have a full task force meeting next Monday. Is that right? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
well,
8 a.m. So
8
welcome back from the holiday weekend.
Well, everybody enjoy. Oh, well, actually, I should see. Is there any further business that comes before this committee or the subcommittee? Because I think we'll probably wrap this subcommittee up with this meeting. Anything else that any of the subcommittee members want to chat about before we adjourn? Not seeing any. Well, thank you, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see a lot of you on Monday when we talk about all this again.